English fluency hacks. Speak confidently in any situation. Imagine this. You're in a bustling conference room. The chatter of different languages fills the air. But the dominant one? English. It's the universal language of business, tech, and global success. You're surrounded by brilliant minds, CEOs, innovators, investors, all exchanging ideas freely. You've got your own ideas. Ideas that could change the world, ideas that could launch your career to new heights. But here's the problem. You've been invited to speak, and you feel that familiar wave of panic rise up in your chest. Your throat tightens. Your mind is racing, trying to translate your thoughts into English, but it's like your brain is stuck in first gear. The words you want to say are there, but they're trapped, tangled in a web of hesitation. Suddenly, all eyes are on you. The room goes silent, waiting for you to speak. What if, in this critical moment, you could rise to the challenge? What if, instead of stumbling, your words flowed effortlessly? Instead of anxiety, you felt calm. And instead of freezing up, you commanded the room with confidence, clarity, and purpose. It's possible. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how to get there. But first, let me tell you about David, a young entrepreneur who was on the verge of losing everything because he couldn't speak English fluently in high-pressure situations. He was brilliant in every other aspect of his work, but this one hurdle nearly shattered his dreams. Yet, instead of backing down, David found a way to hack the system. And now, he's a global success. Stick with me, and by the end of this story, you'll not only know David's fluency hacks, but you'll be ready to apply them in your own life. Before we dive into David's transformative journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'll be sharing real-life stories and actionable tips that will take your English fluency to the next level. You won't want to miss out on this. David grew up in a small town on the outskirts of São Paulo, Brazil. From a young age, he was obsessed with technology. While other kids were playing soccer or video games, David was disassembling old computers, teaching himself how they worked from the inside out. By the time he hit his teenage years, David had built his first software, an app that helped his local community better manage their utility bills. His knack for problem-solving and coding quickly earned him a reputation in his town as a tech whiz. But David had bigger dreams than becoming a local tech guy. He wanted to break into the global market, to create a product that would revolutionize industries, not just in Brazil but around the world. And he knew one thing for sure. To do that, he needed to master English. In the world of tech startups, English wasn't just another language. It was the language of opportunity. David wasn't starting from scratch. Like many students, he had learned English in school. He could read technical documents and understand tutorials online. But speaking? That was an entirely different ballgame. Whenever he tried to speak, especially in professional settings, his nerves would get the better of him. The words in his head wouldn't match the ones coming out of his mouth, and his lack of fluency left him feeling vulnerable. The first setback. It was around this time that David's startup caught the attention of some regional investors. They loved his innovative software solutions for small businesses and were impressed by the growth potential of his company. But there was a catch. To secure significant funding, David would need to pitch his business at an international startup competition in New York City. The competition was notorious for being one of the best platforms for young entrepreneurs to attract serious investors. It was David's golden ticket. Excited and nervous, David started preparing for the event. He spent months perfecting his pitch, rehearsing the technical aspects of his presentation, and researching the investors he'd be speaking to. But there was one part of the preparation he couldn't seem to get right: presenting in English. His friends and colleagues reassured him that his English was good enough. After all, his product was solid. The numbers spoke for themselves. But David wasn't so sure. Every time he practiced his pitch in English, he'd stumble over his words. His accent felt thick and unwieldy, and the flow of his sentences just didn't feel natural. In his gut, David knew that delivering a great pitch wasn't just about having a good product. It was about connecting with people, making them feel confident in your ability to lead a company, and persuading them to invest in your vision. And without confidence in his English, David felt like he was trying to climb a mountain with his legs tied. When the day of the competition arrived, David stood backstage, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the applause as the speaker before him wrapped up their presentation. This was it. This was his moment. But as he stepped up to the podium, looking out at the sea of faces in the audience, everything he had rehearsed started to unravel. His mind went blank, his hands trembled, and he could feel his voice cracking as he tried to deliver the opening lines of his pitch. Despite all his preparation, David's fear of speaking English had paralyzed him. He stumbled through the presentation, barely able to maintain eye contact with the judges. By the time it was over, he knew he had lost his chance. The feedback from the investors confirmed what he already knew. They liked his product, but they didn't feel confident that he could lead an international company. It was a crushing blow. For days, David couldn't shake the disappointment. He had been so close to achieving his dream, only to have it slip away because of his fear of speaking English. He realized then that if he didn't find a way to overcome this barrier, it would continue to hold him back for the rest of his career. Fluency hacks that changed everything. Hack number 1. Pitching to a wall. Building confidence under pressure. David's fear of speaking English wasn't rooted in a lack of knowledge. He understood the language well enough. The real challenge came when he had to speak in high-pressure situations, presenting to investors, leading meetings, or networking with potential business partners. Every time he faced an audience, his brain would freeze, his heart would race, and the anxiety would grip him like a vice. He'd forget words, stumble over sentences, and feel his confidence drain away. He knew he needed a solution, but traditional methods weren't cutting it. Practicing in front of a mirror helped a little, but it wasn't enough. Reading scripts or memorizing phrases didn't address the core problem. He needed to be able to think and speak spontaneously in front of others, and no textbook could teach him that. One day, after a particularly frustrating failed pitch, David had an idea. It was simple but radical. What if he could practice presenting in English, not in front of an audience, but to something that represented the high-stakes situations he dreaded? He needed to simulate the pressure. So, he started pitching to a wall. This might sound ridiculous at first, but David's approach was more structured than it seemed. He didn't just talk to the wall. He imagined the wall was a hostile audience. He would picture judgmental investors, impatient clients, or skeptical colleagues staring back at him. The wall became a stand-in for the real-world challenges he faced. The daily wall practice routine. Every day, David would set aside 30 minutes to pitch his business ideas, not just in English, but under the imagined stress of his toughest audience. He'd simulate distractions by intentionally losing his train of thought, mimicking the nervousness he felt in real life. Sometimes, he'd even imagine a harsh investor interrupting him or asking difficult questions mid-pitch. At first, this exercise made him more anxious than anything else. His palms would sweat, his heart would race, and his words would still come out jumbled. But he stuck with it. Over time, a transformation started to happen. By consistently facing his fears in this low-risk environment, David slowly built up his tolerance for pressure. He learned to keep going even when he made mistakes. He trained himself to stay composed when he stumbled over a word or lost his train of thought. And most importantly, he developed the resilience to push through moments of self-doubt. After several months of this practice, David found that the real-world scenarios he once dreaded no longer felt as intimidating. The high-stakes meetings and presentations that had once triggered his anxiety became just another version of his daily wall practice. He was no longer afraid of making mistakes because he had trained himself to handle them. Why this hack works. Pitching to a wall isn't about practicing perfect English. It's about building mental resilience and learning how to stay calm under pressure. The act of simulating high-stakes environments forces your brain to adapt to stress in a controlled way. It's like exposure therapy for public speaking fears. By repeatedly practicing in the simulated environment, you trick your brain into seeing stressful situations as less threatening. For David, this hack was a turning point. He no longer felt crippled by fear in front of an audience because he had built up a tolerance for the pressure. His fluency didn't improve overnight, but his confidence did, and that made all the difference. Hack number 2. The 3-second rule for mental clarity. David's second breakthrough came not from practicing English but from mastering his mental state during conversations. In high-stakes situations, especially when speaking in a second language, it's easy for your mind to race. You might worry about what the other person is thinking, whether they're judging your accent, or whether you're going to make a mistake. This mental chatter can lead to panic, and panic leads to errors. David found himself constantly battling this inner dialogue. During meetings or conversations, his brain would rush ahead, trying to predict what was coming next. This would lead to mistakes, awkward pauses, or worse, blurting out sentences before he had a chance to think them through. One day, while watching an interview with a famous public speaker, David learned about a technique that changed everything. The 3-second rule. The idea was simple but powerful. Before responding to any question or comment, wait 3 seconds. This brief pause gave the speaker time to gather their thoughts, ensuring they spoke with clarity and purpose. David decided to apply this rule to his own life. The next time he was in a meeting, instead of jumping in with a quick response, he forced himself to pause. At first, the silence felt uncomfortable. He worried that people would think he didn't understand the conversation or that he was unprepared. But to his surprise, the opposite happened. Mastering the pause. The first time David tried the 3-second rule, he was in a virtual meeting with a potential client from the United States. The client asked a complex question about David's software. Normally, David would have scrambled to respond quickly, afraid of being judged for taking too long. But this time, he took a deep breath and silently counted to 3 before answering. The pause allowed David to process the question fully. He wasn't just translating words from Portuguese to English in his head. He was thinking about the meaning behind the question and how best to respond. When he finally spoke, his answer was clear and concise. And to his surprise, the client didn't seem bothered by the pause at all. In fact, they seemed to appreciate the thoughtful response. David began using the 3-second rule in every conversation. He found that the brief pause not only gave him time to think but also reduced his anxiety. Instead of feeling rushed or pressured to speak, he felt in control of the conversation. The pause became a tool for mental clarity, allowing him to focus on what he wanted to say rather than on the fear of making mistakes. Why this hack works. The 3-second rule works because it interrupts the cycle of panic that can happen when you're under pressure. In high-stress situations, your brain often goes into overdrive, trying to process too much information at once. This can lead to mistakes, awkward silences, or rushing through your words. By pausing for just a few seconds, you give your brain the time it needs to organize your thoughts, ensuring that you respond with clarity and confidence. For David, this hack was a game changer. It wasn't just about speaking English more fluently. It was about staying calm and composed in any situation. The 3-second rule allowed him to slow down, think clearly, and communicate more effectively, even when the pressure was on. Hack number 3. Immersion without overwhelm. Podcasts and audiobooks. The next hack David discovered was about immersion. We've all heard that the best way to learn a language is to immerse yourself in it. But for many people, the idea of diving headfirst into English-speaking environments can be overwhelming. It's easy to get frustrated or discouraged when you don't understand every word, and that frustration can lead to burnout. David had experienced this firsthand. In the early days of his language learning journey, he had tried to immerse himself by watching English TV shows, reading English articles, and listening to English music. But it often felt like too much. He would get lost in complex dialogues, misunderstand key points, and end up feeling more confused than before. Then, David stumbled upon a more structured approach to immersion, one that allowed him to practice English daily without feeling overwhelmed. He started using podcasts and audiobooks as his primary tools for language learning, but with a twist: active immersion. Within months, David's approach to English had transformed. He no longer avoided speaking English in meetings or feared pitching to investors. In fact, he sought out more opportunities to present in English, knowing that every time he spoke, he was becoming more fluent and confident. 6 months after his disastrous pitch, David returned to San Francisco for a second chance. This time, he walked onto that stage with a sense of calm. He delivered his pitch with clarity and passion. And when the questions came, he didn't rush or stumble. He used his 3-second rule, thought through his answers, and responded confidently. The result? David secured not 1, but 2 major international investors. His startup is now expanding globally, and he's regularly featured as a speaker at international tech events. David's story is a reminder that English fluency isn't about perfection. It's about building confidence, mastering a few powerful hacks, and pushing through the fear. You don't have to be a native speaker to communicate like a pro. You just need the right tools. And here's the thing, you can do it too. If David can go from fear and rejection to global success, so can you. The only question is, are you ready to take the first step? If you found David's story inspiring and want to learn more about how you can hack your way to English fluency, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We're here to give you the tools, the tips, and the motivation to speak English with confidence in any situation. You've got this.